Hi, Yael. Hi, Carla. I hope you can hear me well, and I hope you can hear each other because this is our first panel of today. And thank you so much for joining us digitally. Both of you got started very young, Yael as an entrepreneur and Carla as an activist. So I would perhaps like to talk about both of you starting at such a young age at the beginning. So we could start with Yael. You are co-founder of Zeam, which you co-founded with your partner Dietrich. Last year, you also got on our Forbes DACH 30 under 30 list for the founding of the company. And Zeam is an agency that consults companies on how they can better connect with and work with younger generations, specifically Generation Z, so people born in the late 90s. And I would be curious to know, when did you first realize that there was a demand for something like this, a company that consults other companies on how they can talk to the younger generations? And how did you decide to found your company so young?
So actually, I always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur at one point in my life. And I was working as a journalist right after I did my high school. And I really decided that I did not want to go to study, which was very hard at that time because my whole surroundings would be like, yeah, why don't you want to study? Go and do something right. And then I was working as a journalist and also as an actress. And I more and more realized that there was really this thing of older generations that did not understand young people anymore. And I was getting asked by the company I worked at, which is Blick. It's like the Bild Zeitung in Switzerland. And like I started to do formats for young people, and everyone started to ask me about, yeah, can you explain us what young people think and what they do? And that's when I really realized that there's a huge gap we need to close, because it's very important that all generations work together and understand each other. And that's when we started Zeam, like 1.5 years ago in February 2020. And it's been a very exciting ride since then.
Great. And then let's take this question over to Carla, but slightly differently. So I read that you started organizing demonstrations in 2019, so 2 years ago. Was that the beginning, the first time you started working with Fridays for Future or taking on an organization role? Or did you also organize before that? We just don't know about it.
Well, I actually started out with climate activism before Fridays for Future with Fossil Free, which is a group which organizes for divestment, meaning that public institutions don't put their funds into fossil institutions like RWE, which is a coal power company in Germany. And then in December 2018, or maybe it was November, I saw the speech from Greta Thunberg at the climate conference COP in Katowice, which went viral. I had heard about Greta Thunberg striking in front of the Swedish parliament before, was quite inspired by that. And then she held that speech telling the truth about the climate crisis and putting all that urgency, which you often don't see at those climate conferences where everybody just says, okay, yes, climate is so important and we want to do something about it. She had those really clear-minded words. And that was the moment when I was kind of inspired by her and found other people who were also inspired and said, okay, let's start those school strikes. And that's when we started connecting all over Germany, but also internationally, and started organizing the first school strikes in December 2018. And from then it went on and on and on. And in the beginning, nobody thought that now, nearly 3 years later, we would still be here out there striking for climate justice. But we are, and we are one of the biggest social movements in the past decades. So that's how it all started. But in the beginning, nobody planned that this would get this huge and that the influence would be as big and that we would be able to empower and mobilize so many people, because I think that's one of the most important aspects of this whole movement, is that a lot of young people who were frustrated, who were angry at the politics, but didn't know where to put that anger, where to put that frustration, finally had a place to where they could find themselves and where they could address the world leaders telling about the urgency of the climate crisis and demanding better politics.
I would then just back up with a backup question also to you, Carla, because you just mentioned the COP, the UN Climate Conference, but an earlier one. The COP26 wrapped up just recently in Glasgow. I would be curious to hear what your thoughts on the results are. Are you disappointed? Are you encouraged? And perhaps a more important question, do you think we can trust grown-ups to find the solution to climate change, or do young people have to take it into their own hands?
Well, from my perspective at the COP, you can't be frustrated when you don't have expectations. And I didn't expect this climate conference to be the place where actual change would happen, because we've seen it over the past decades that those international conferences and summits, it's always world leaders coming together, declaring, okay, yes, we want to fight climate change. We want to do something. We want to have ambitious climate politics. But in the end, what matters is not words, but action. And it's the same for this COP. So we've seen all the people declaring that they want to do climate action, that they want to limit the global heating to 1.5 degrees. At the same time, the actual results where they say, okay, do they want to phase out coal? How about combustion engines? They are much too low. The targets the individual countries have set, they're also too low to actually limit the climate crisis to 1.5 degrees. And I'm not frustrated because I didn't expect an outcome which would be enough. So it's clear we still need the protests on the ground. We need the people demanding and fighting for climate justice, addressing leaders, but also addressing, for example, institutions and companies like big oil, gas, and coal, which are the responsible for the climate crisis and who do everything in their power to stop climate action from happening because they profit from the extraction of fossil fuels. So we need the younger generation on the street, but we also need all of us to listen to the most affected people in areas, because it won't be the white privileged kids from the northern countries, from the global north and the industrialized countries, but those who are affected by the climate crisis, indigenous people who are keeping the lands and the big mass of biodiversity, for example, guarded in their communities. So that's also the people we need to actually drive that change forward.
I would like to then come to the topic of social media, especially when talking about Gen Z and young people, you can't avoid it. And so I will give this question to Yael. Obviously, when you consult companies on how they can better connect with young people, social media plays an integral part to that. I saw on your website that you do a lot of TikTok consulting or building up companies' presences on that platform. How important do you think social media is to reaching young people? Can it even be done without social media?
I mean, I think social media is the place where young people are. And social media brings so many opportunities and possibilities. For example, it's very inspiring for me to hear to see also what you do with the whole Fridays for Future movement. And that would not be possible without social media. Social media brings us young people the opportunity to really gather together and stand in for what we want, and for us to bring a change, because young people never had a voice back in the days. Young people were never heard. It was always said, you're too young, you cannot decide anything, you need to grow up first before you can actually do something, right? And now with social media, we get a voice, and we get to do movements like Friday for Futures, which actually shape the world and change something. And still, we need the generations to work together. We need the older people, older generations that are in leading positions and in positions where they can actually decide to listen to us and to hear us. And I think social media for that is the place where we can actually do that. And also the opposite side around, of course, where also those companies can actually reach us. And I think it brings generations together.
So seeing social media in more of a positive light, as bringing people together, we obviously know there's also a lot of debate about mental health, specifically for young girls. And for instance, platforms like Instagram. You mentioned that something like Fridays for Future might not have been possible without social media. And we have a great chance to just ask Carla directly, do you think that is true? Where would the movement be if you could have not used platforms like Twitter and Instagram?
Well, I don't think that there would have been no movement at all, because we've seen it in the past that movement building has been possible, even in times when there was no social media, even no internet or digital communication at all. But definitely Fridays for Future would look a whole lot different if there hadn't been social media, because, for example, how quickly we could start, how quickly we could connect between the local groups in the different countries or the local groups within Germany was just possible because we could organize, for example, everything via WhatsApp, and we have WhatsApp groups with people from all the different countries and cities organizing inside there. At the same time, the whole mobilization works just through social media. It's one of the most important aspects, and a lot of the content we create, the opinions we put forward, the thoughts and the messages we spread them mostly via social media, because differently to like classic media, where there's always like a filter through the journalists and the editors who decide on what gets published or not. On social media, we can decide, and also single people can have a voice and make themselves heard. You can have different climate activists who are visible and to put forward their stories. I think one really important aspect is that you can get the look inside the lives or the opinions also from activists who you would never get in touch with when there hadn't been social media. For example, we have activists from all over the world, and when they put forward their stories and messages on social media, I in Germany can see it. I can get to know something about the horrible reality of the climate crisis, for example, in the most affected areas in the global south. So I think all these aspects are really important. Also that, for example, through social media, the friends from people who are, for example, at a climate strike, see that their friends are there, and maybe the next time they join them and they get interested in that, because it's a very low level entry into the whole topic. And at the same time, you can find quite a lot of information on social media if you want to get to know more. But it's the first time, it's just really easy. Maybe you see a friend who posts a picture from a climate strike. So it's definitely one really important aspect of our work. And I think especially there's like this divide between the different platforms. For example, whilst Instagram really works for the people who come to the climate strike, and who are the activists themselves. Twitter, for example, is more a space where you talk to journalists and politicians and put forward really different messages.
So I'm hearing a lot of positive things about social media today, not to say that there aren't other sides to it, but we have 2 minutes left. And now I'd like to wrap up with a question to Yael. You founded Zeam only 2020, so recently, not that long ago. And obviously at Forbes, especially for under 30, we love tracking young businesses and their success going forward. So I'd be curious to know, what are your goals for the company, building a company on your own together with your partner? As a young woman, what are you planning for 2022?
So we actually have big plans, but like it's more a vision. Like we really want to bring young people and young thinking into companies, and like disconnect generations and close gaps, because that's what's actually a big problem. Like young people have such a great voice and can really change things, as we see with so many different movements that they already brought up. And I really like, that's what we want for Zeam. We want companies and generations and politics and like the whole society to really embrace what we want and what we see, and to really help us change the world together. And that's also what we want to do with Zeam. And I'm very excited for everything that's coming now next.
So are we. So we can end on a positive note of unity between generations. Thank you for both of you so much for tuning in. And I will throw it back to our team in the other studio.
Thank you.